So this is a video response to a couple of friends of mine, Angus and Jeff and Jonathan, who are over on a YouTube channel called The Exceptional State. And they're talking about this book, The Philosophy of Freedom by Rudolf Steiner, which a bunch of us have been reading. You may have seen some of my posts about this text. And we're on chapter 4, and a recurring issue that has continued to arise is the relationship between percepts and concepts, basically, or between observation and thinking. It's another way of putting it. And this dilemma has been present in all of philosophy. It really is the dilemma of philosophy, and it gets reified in different ways as a mind-body dualism, as different epistemological problems about how ideas or mental representations relate to things in the world. But in this particular conversation that my friends are having on this YouTube channel, I'll link to their video on chapter 4, The Exceptional State. They're talking about a concept and how to define it, or the difficulty of defining it, because concepts are different than the names that we give to things. Concepts cannot be reduced to words, right? We often run into problems when we attempt to define anything. We can't quite get to the essential concept. We can kind of only offer descriptions of the characteristics or the various aspects of an entity. Even though we do seem to have this intuitive capacity to recognize entities and to know immediately how, it's as though we grasp the concept for the thing intuitively once we've come to know the thing, right? But what's going on in this process that we can so easily describe in this way is quite vexing, really. Are we discovering the concepts of things, like their true essence? Or are we creating the concepts that adequately apply to the things? Or are we creating the concepts that, in fact, do, in some sense, essentially constitute the entity? And how could that be? It would need to be some kind of a participatory relationship if that were the case, right? I mean, Aristotle used to describe the way that the essence of a thing is actually perceived, and indeed, Steiner describes this residual clairvoyance, or the sort of residue of original participation, to use Owen Barfield's terms, that was still present among the ancient Greeks, where in some sense they really did hear the thoughts of the world or perceive the ideas at work in nature. But something happened in the evolution of consciousness since then that led to this disconnection between concepts and percepts, and the human being, the human individual, the human I has been put more in a situation of having to create concepts rather than receive them from the world. It's as though the world went silent and became disenchanted, and now the human mind was the source of all of the ideas, all of the intelligibility in the world, right? It's as though, in a biblical sense, and in some ways the Bible can be read as an allegory of this epistemological situation. Adam in the garden knew all the names of the animals and could speak with them as a result. But then after the fall, having eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve are now epistemologically severed from the true language of the world, from the logos. They can't hear it anymore and have to resort to the invention of their own kind of artificial languages, indeed. And this post-fall situation, leads to all sorts of skepticisms and critical idealisms and phenomenalisms and empiricisms that cut the human being off from the ultimate nature of reality. And, physical science in the 20th century has continued to advance its mathematical understanding of the world. But when it comes to translating that into something that might make sense to, a human being, they just admit, as Richard Feynman famously said, it's absurd. Nature is just absurd, and it's never going to jive with common sense, and we just have to accept it. He also said if you think, nobody understands quantum mechanics, he says. So it literally, we're being asked, physics, it's supposed to be a mathematical, empirically grounded science, right? But it's telling us, nope, you just have to accept the complete irrationality of the picture of nature it's presenting. I think this is a symptom of the fall. It's a symptom of this split between concept and percept. Now, someone like Goethe is trying to step into a new kind of participation, not to regress to original participation as if we could undo the fall and return to the Garden of Eden. No, he's trying to cultivate a scientific mode of perception that's also an imaginative mode of participation to let the world speak again, but it's a form of participation that's also creative on our part. We have to become, like Goethe was, an artist who can participate and create with nature the form that perhaps the ancient Greeks were merely discovering there or finding there as given. Goethe has a more alchemical, you might say, view of this, where the human being is called to be a co-worker with nature in its spiritualization, in a way. And so I think, what Steiner's trying to draw our attention to is how percept and concept have become separated. They didn't used to be, and there's a way for us to bring them back together again. But to bring them back together again, and Jeff, you were really highlighting this, it's an act of the I. It's this kind of thinking activity, which is also a willing and a feeling, I would say. But it's an activity of the I whereby we reconnect these two severed halves of the world. And it requires, in a way, the human being post-fall has to engage in a kind of symbolic activity, right? So, and the symbol that we're trying to create ultimately is really ourselves. And it's in the self, in the I, rather, that each of us has to create that symbol, be that symbol, really, that would bring these two parts of the world back together meaningfully, right? Connecting what's given in perception with what's actively brought forth via the concept, right? The I is the individual that brings the particular percept and the universal concept together, and we do this over and over again with all of our thinking, our conscious thinking and willing and feeling, to the extent that we can be conscious of all of those. And I think in some ways the symbol of the I or the I am is the reason it's holy is because it's the deed through which we accomplish this task, right? Of bringing the two severed parts of the world back together. Yeah, hopefully that makes some sense. I wanted to just get that thought out. As I was listening, it occurred to me that I needed to share it, and hopefully it lands for you guys, Angus and Jeff and Jonathan, and anyone else who's listening. Hopefully you're not totally lost, but I tried to provide the context of this conversation. So